I won't marry that giant, she cried, her voice shaking as it echoed through the small wooden office. The man behind the desk didn't even flinch. He had heard protests before. Tears, fear, anger, but the paper in his hand didn't change. It's already arranged, he said flatly. The contract is signed. The journey is paid. You leave tomorrow. Emily Carter stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. She had imagined many things when she agreed to leave the city behind, but not this. Not being handed over to a man she had never met, described only as large, quiet, and in need of a wife. A giant, they had whispered. A man no woman stayed with. A man who lived alone on a distant ranch where no one visited. She shook her head, backing away. No, there has to be a mistake, she said softly. I can't. You can, the man interrupted without looking up. And you will. The finality in his voice crushed whatever hope she had left. By morning, she was on the stagecoach, her small suitcase clutched tightly in her lap as the town disappeared behind her. The road stretched endlessly ahead, leading her toward a life she had not chosen. The journey took days. Each mile made her heart heavier. She barely slept, barely spoke. The other passengers kept their distance, whispering occasionally about the place she was going, and about the man waiting for her. When the coach finally stopped at the edge of a wide, empty ranch, the driver climbed down and glanced at her. This is it, he said simply. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the seat. Is he here? She asked quietly. The driver nodded toward the distance. He's always here. She stepped down slowly, her boots sinking slightly into the dry dirt. The wind moved across the land, carrying dust and silence in equal measure. And then she saw him, standing near the fence, tall, far taller than any man she had ever seen, broad-shouldered, still as stone. He didn't wave, he didn't call out, he just watched. Her breath caught. That's him, the driver said before climbing back onto the coach. Without another word, he rode away, leaving her alone. Emily stood frozen for a moment, then forced herself to walk forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. The man didn't move until she was close enough to see his face, and when she did, her fear didn't disappear, but it shifted. Yes, he was large, intimidating. His hands were rough, his presence overwhelming, but his eyes were calm, not cold, not cruel, just quiet. You're Emily, he said. His voice was deep, steady. She nodded, unable to speak. I'm Samuel Hayes, he added. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the cabin. You can come in. No demand, no force, just an offer. Emily hesitated, then stepped past him. The cabin was simple, clean, warm. She stood near the doorway, unsure what to do next. Samuel didn't crowd her. He didn't even come close. He moved to the table instead, pouring water into a cup and setting it down. You've had a long trip, he said. You should rest. Emily stared at him, confusion mixing with fear. This wasn't what she expected. No harsh orders, no cold silence. He simply turned and began tending to something near the stove, giving her space. That night she barely slept. She listened for every sound, every movement, waiting for something terrible that never came. Morning arrived quietly. She stepped outside cautiously, finding Samuel already working. He didn't look up immediately. When he did, he gave a small nod. There's food inside, he said. Eat when you're ready. And that was it. No pressure, no expectation. Days passed like that, silent, but not uncomfortable. Samuel never raised his voice, never forced conversation, never treated her like anything other than someone who belonged there without being owned. Emily found herself watching him, the way he worked from sunrise to sunset, the way he fixed things carefully, patiently, the way he spoke to the animals with a calm tone, never harsh, never rushed. He was strong, stronger than anyone she had ever known. But he never used that strength to intimidate. One afternoon, as she struggled to carry a bucket of water, it slipped from her hands, spilling across the ground. She flinched, expecting anger. But Samuel simply walked over, picked up the bucket and said, "It's all right, we'll get more." No frustration, no blame. Emily stared at him, something inside her shifting just slightly. That evening she spoke for the first time without being asked. "Why did you send for a wife?" she asked quietly. Samuel paused, then sat across from her. "Because this place gets quiet," he said. "Too quiet." She studied him. "That's it?" He gave a faint shrug. "Didn't seem right to stay alone forever." Emily looked down at her hands. "You could have chosen someone who wanted to come." Samuel didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "Maybe I hoped they would, after they arrived." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. There was no arrogance, no assumption, just a quiet hope. Days turned into weeks. The fear she had arrived with didn't disappear overnight, but it softened, slowly, replaced by something she didn't recognize at first: comfort. She started helping more, cooking, cleaning, walking the fields with him. She began to notice the small things, how he always left space for her at the table, how he never entered a room suddenly, how he spoke less but meant more. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and red, Emily stood beside him near the fence. She looked up at him, really looked this time, not at his size, not at the rumors, but at the man himself. "You're not what they said," she murmured. Samuel glanced down at her. "People say a lot of things," he replied quietly. She nodded, then added softly, "I was afraid of you." He didn't look surprised. "That makes sense." Emily hesitated, then said, "I'm not, anymore." The words hung in the air between them. Samuel didn't respond right away, but something in his expression shifted, something small but real. And in that moment, Emily realized something she hadn't expected. The walls she had built around herself were beginning to break. Not because she was forced to tear them down, but because piece by piece, he had given her a reason to let them fall. And that quiet kindness was about to change everything. The next morning felt different, though nothing obvious had changed. The same sun rose over the ranch. The same wind carried dust across the open land. The same silence filled the spaces between words. But inside Emily, something had shifted. She stepped out onto the porch and saw Samuel near the barn, lifting a heavy beam as if it weighed nothing. He worked steadily, focused, unaware that she was watching him the way she hadn't before. Not with fear, but with curiosity. She walked toward him slowly, her steps more certain than they had been days ago. "Do you need help?" she asked. He looked up, surprised, then shook his head gently. "It's heavy." Emily crossed her arms slightly. "I didn't ask if it was heavy. I asked if you needed help." For a brief second, something like a smile touched the corner of his lips. "All right," he said simply. He showed her where to hold the beam, guiding her without touching more than necessary. They worked together in quiet rhythm, lifting, adjusting, securing. It wasn't perfect. She stumbled once. He steadied the beam before it fell, saying nothing about it. But when they finished, Emily stepped back, breathing a little harder than usual, and smiling without realizing it. Samuel noticed. He didn't mention it, but he noticed. Days passed and the distance between them grew smaller, not in space, but in understanding. Emily began to ask questions about the ranch. He answered, always simply, never more than needed. She told him small things about her past. Not everything, not yet, but enough for him to see glimpses of who she had been before fear had shaped her. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly. The sky darkened and the wind picked up fast. Emily stood near the doorway, watching as Samuel moved quickly across the yard, securing tools and guiding the animals into shelter. "Come inside," she called out. He didn't answer immediately, finishing what he needed to do before heading back. As he stepped into the cabin, rain began to fall hard against the roof. Emily handed him a dry cloth without thinking. He paused, looking at it for a moment before taking it. "Thanks," he said quietly. She nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "You always make sure everything is safe before yourself," she said. He shrugged slightly. "That's the job." Emily looked at him more closely. "And who makes sure you're safe?" He didn't have an answer for that, not right away. The storm lasted through the night. Thunder rolled across the land, shaking the walls slightly. Emily sat near the fire, her knees drawn close, listening. Samuel stayed on the other side of the room, giving her space like he always did. But at one loud crack of thunder, she flinched. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. He noticed. Without a word, he stood, added more wood to the fire, and moved a little closer. Not too close, just enough that the warmth reached her more fully. He sat there, silent, steady, and for the first time since she arrived, Emily didn't feel alone in the storm. Morning came with clear skies and fresh air. The ranch looked untouched, strong against the storm's attempt to shake it. As they stepped outside, Emily took a deep breath, then said something unexpected. "I used to think strength meant being loud, or feared," she said. Samuel glanced at her. "And now?" She looked at him. "Now I think it means being steady." He didn't respond, but his silence held agreement. Time moved forward. Their routine became something more than survival. It became shared life. Small moments turned into something meaningful. Working side by side, eating at the same table, watching the sunset without needing words. Then one afternoon, a rider appeared at the edge of the property. Emily saw him first. Her body tensed instantly. The past she had tried to leave behind stood right there, approaching. "Stay inside," Samuel said firmly. She shook her head. "No, I won't hide." The rider stopped near the fence, his expression sharp. "Emily," he called out, "you've made this difficult." Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between them. "You've said enough," he replied calmly. The man sneered slightly. "This doesn't concern you." Samuel's voice didn't rise. "It does now." The tension thickened. Emily stepped forward, her fear still there, but no longer controlling her. "I'm not going back," she said clearly. The rider looked at her, surprised by the change in her voice. "You don't have a choice." Samuel shifted slightly, his presence unmovable. "She does," he said. The silence that followed was heavy. The rider looked between them, calculating. Finally, he let out a short breath. "This isn't over," he said before turning his horse and riding away. Emily stood still for a moment, then slowly exhaled. Samuel turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded. "I am now." There was something new in her eyes, not fear, but certainty. That evening, as the sun dipped low once again, Emily stood beside the fence where she had once been too afraid to even step outside alone. She looked out across the land, then up at Samuel. "I said I wouldn't marry a giant," she said softly. He glanced at her, unsure where this was going. She smiled slightly. "Turns out, I was wrong about you." Samuel didn't answer right away, but this time he didn't look away either. And in the quiet that followed, no promises were spoken. No grand declarations made, but something deeper settled between them. Something built not on fear, not on obligation, but on trust. And as the wind moved gently across the ranch, carrying warmth instead of doubt, Emily realized that the walls she had built were gone. Not broken, not forced down, but replaced by something stronger.